In the heart of winter, when snowstorms howled like banshees and blanketed the world in a chilling white shroud, I found myself trapped in an icy nightmare. It was a night that forever scorched itself into my soul, a night haunted by the hollowed hunters of the shivering snows. I had been trekking through a desolate mountain pass, battered by relentless winds and blinding snow, my every step a struggle against the relentless cold. As darkness enveloped the land, casting ominous shadows across the frozen landscape, I knew I was hopelessly lost. Driven by desperation, I stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, its dilapidated walls promising shelter from the raging storm. The door creaked open with a chilling groan, inviting me into a realm of eerie silence. A sense of foreboding washed over me as I stepped inside. The cabin was stripped bare, its walls adorned with cobwebs and the scent of decay hanging heavy in the air. A single, flickering candle cast a dim glow, casting grotesque shadows that danced upon the dust-laden floor. As I explored the desolate interior, my heart pounded with unease. I could hear faint whispers carried on the wind, like the murmuring of distant voices. Suddenly, the wind outside howled with a fury that shook the cabin to its core. Frantically, I searched for a place to hide, my eyes darting to a small, wooden crate tucked away in the far corner. I huddled inside, my body trembling as the wind screamed and rattled the walls. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as I waited, my breath hitching in my throat. Slowly, the sound of the wind subsided, replaced by a deathly silence. I peeled back the lid of the crate, peering out into the darkness. And then I saw them. A group of figures, their faces hidden beneath hooded cloaks, silhouetted against the dim candlelight. They stood motionless, their eyes glinting with an eerie glow. Frozen with terror, I watched as the hooded figures advanced towards me. Their cloaks billowed behind them like ravens' wings, and a cold, metallic sound filled the air. I realized with horror that each of them carried a sharpened ice pick. Time seemed to stand still as they approached, their every move deliberate and predatory. I could feel their icy breath on my neck as they reached the crate, their gleaming picks glinting ominously. And then, in that split second, I snapped. Desperation surged through me, and I fought back with all my might. I kicked, screamed, and struggled, but my efforts were met with a chilling laugh. The figures dragged me from the crate, their faces now visible beneath their hoods. They were twisted and deformed, their eyes filled with an unholy hunger. They raised their ice picks, and I knew that my life was about to be extinguished in the most horrifying way imaginable. But in a moment of desperation, I remembered a small, rusted knife I had hidden in my backpack. I fumbled for it, my fingers shaking as I unsheathed the blade. With a guttural yell, I lunged at the nearest figure. Blood erupted onto the cold, wooden floor as my knife plunged into the creature's flesh. It let out an inhuman scream and fell back, its companions howling in rage. In the ensuing chaos, I fought my way through the pack, each swing of my knife a desperate attempt at survival. I managed to fend them off, but not without paying a price. I was battered and bloodied, my clothes torn and my body aching. As the last of the figures stumbled away into the darkness, I collapsed to the ground, shivering and exhausted. I had survived the hollowed hunters of the shivering snows, but the memory of that night would forever haunt my dreams. To this day, I fear the snow and the remote wilderness. For I know that somewhere out there, in the desolate mountains and freezing winds, they may still be lurking, waiting for their next victim. It was the middle of December, and snow fell in thick blankets, coating the ground with blinding whiteness. My house stood solitary in the secluded woods where I lived, miles away from any neighbors or civilization for that matter. Being a writer, I found solace in the quiet isolation, but that winter something different began. The snow wasn't letting up, and with it came power outages that swallowed my home into darkness. Each night, the wind shrieked like a banshee, and the snow fell relentlessly, creating a suffocating silence around my house. The outside world had disappeared, devoured by the snowstorm. It was as if I were trapped in a world of my own, isolated, alone, and forgotten. I should have been used to the solitude, but something was amiss. One night, just as the last lights of dusk disappeared, I glimpsed a shadowy figure through the frosted window. Its form was vague, obscured by the swirling snow, but it stood there, watching me. The wave of icy fear that gripped me was like nothing I had ever felt before. I tore my gaze from the window, heart pounding in my chest, but it felt as if a part of that shadow had already seeped into my home. Fear became my constant companion. The nights were the worst, filled with shadows that danced and flickered at the edge of my vision, whispers that swirled on the freezing wind, and the eerie silence that punctuated my thumping heart. Sleep eluded me, and my mind conjured horrors from the depths of my subconscious. The snowstorm had unleashed something more than just the cold. It had brought a menace, a threat lurking in the white wilderness around my home. On the third night, as I sat by the dying embers of my fireplace, I heard a creak from the porch outside. It was faint, masked by howling wind, but it was there. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. The creak came again, this time louder, followed by a soft knock on the door. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to move. I took a deep breath and walked toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The moment I opened it, a blast of freezing wind hit me, and my eyes were blinded by the swirling snow. Amidst this chaos, I made out a figure standing on my porch. It was tall, bundled in thick layers of clothing, its face obscured by a scarf. In the dim light of the storm, I could barely make out its eyes, two gleaming orbs that seemed to pierce through me. The stranger raised its hand, and in it, I saw a knife, a glint of metal that shattered my fragile sense of safety. Terror propelled me backward, and I slammed the door shut. I leaned against it, my body shaking with fear. The stranger banged on the door, its muffled voice a guttural growl. It yanked at the handle, trying to force its way in. I scrambled away from the door and ran for the stairs, my heart pounding like a drum. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard the crash of glass. The stranger had broken the window and climbed inside. I ran down the hall, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor, my mind racing. The stranger was somewhere in the house, hunting me, and I was trapped. I had to think fast. The attic. I ran toward the attic door and threw it open. I scrambled inside and pulled the ladder up after me. I crouched in the darkness, shivering from both fear and cold, the sound of the stranger's footsteps echoing through the house below. I waited for what felt like an eternity, listening to the stranger crashing through the house, its grunts and curses echoing through the empty rooms. The sound of its footsteps grew fainter as it moved away from the attic, and slowly, the adrenaline that had kept me going began to fade. Exhaustion washed over me, and I drifted into a fitful sleep, haunted by nightmares of the stranger. When I awoke, the snowstorm had passed. The sun shone brightly, casting an ethereal glow on the snow-covered landscape. I emerged from the attic, wary of what I might find. The house was empty, no sign of the stranger, but every room bore the marks of its visit. Broken glass littered the floor, furniture was overturned, and the sense of violation was palpable. I had survived the night, but the horror of that night would forever linger in the back of my mind. The snow had brought more than just the cold. It had brought a darkness, a menace, and a memory that would haunt my every winter to come. I've never been fond of winter. The cold, the frost, it always set my teeth chattering. But I never imagined a snowstorm could bring such terror. It started as a peaceful December night. Snowflakes danced softly, painting the town in a serene white blanket. But by midnight, the wind was howling like a banshee, and the snow was falling sideways. Power lines snapped, plunging us into darkness. Huddled by the fireplace with my wife, Maggie, I felt a sense of unease. The storm was relentless, shaking the very foundations of our home. Suddenly, a loud knock shattered the quiet. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Maggie whispered, "Who could that be?" Fear propelled me to the door. As I slowly opened it, a gust of wind and snow blinded me. When my vision cleared, I saw a stranger. He was tall and lanky, with wild eyes and a thick, unkempt beard. "Can I come in?" he asked in a raspy voice. "I'm lost." Reluctantly, I let him in. He shook off the snow and stood dripping on my living room floor. As he spoke, his eyes never left mine. He told us he was from a nearby town, but had gotten disoriented in the storm. Despite my unease, I offered him a hot bowl of soup. As he ate, he seemed to relax. But something about his presence still made me nervous. The stranger finished his soup and stood up. "I should get going," he said. "Thank you for your hospitality." I walked him to the door. As I opened it, a blast of wind blew snow into my face. "Be careful," I shouted. He nodded and disappeared into the storm. We went to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The stranger's eyes had held a strange intensity, like he was hiding something. In the morning, the storm had passed. I cautiously ventured outside and found no sign of the stranger's footprints. It was as if he had simply vanished. As the days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about the stranger. He had been lost, but he had also been watching us. knot of fear twisted in my stomach. One evening, I received a chilling letter in the mail. It was from the local police. They had found the body of a young woman, brutally murdered, in the woods near our home. My blood ran cold. The stranger had been lying. He hadn't been lost at all. He had come to our house for a sinister purpose. The police questioned us, but they couldn't find any evidence linking us to the murder. They believed the stranger was still at large. We moved away soon after, unable to shake the fear that cast a long shadow over our lives. The stranger's cold eyes and chilling confession had scarred us forever. I learned a terrifying lesson that night. Even in the most serene of settings, a stranger's dark intentions can lurk beneath the surface. And when a snowstorm rages, the secrets hidden in the shadows can be mere deadly.